How my sister's lies ruined my life and made my own father choose her over me. Years later, he tried to ruin my wedding when I refused to forgive them. My name is Emma. If you told me a year ago that my own family would turn their back on me, I would have laughed. But that's exactly what happened. And it all started with my half-sister Lee. Lee has always had a knack for drama. But I never imagined she'd destroy my life with one of her lies. Lee was the type who needed to be the center of attention all the time. Growing up, I tried to be a good big sister, even though we were never really close. Our dad remarried when I was 10, and Lee was born a few years later. She was the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. My dad and stepmother, Margaret, adored her, and she knew how to use that to her advantage. Lee knew she could manipulate people, but I didn't realize how far she'd take it. It started subtly at first. Lee would make small comments to Dad and Margaret about me, things like, Emma's acting weird lately, or, Emma's been staying out late. I'm worried about her. At first, they didn't think much of it. I was 24, living on my own, trying to figure out my life after college. But Lee kept planting seeds of doubt, and I didn't even notice it until it was too late. One day, I got a call from Dad. His voice was tense, and I could feel something was off. Emma, we need to talk, he said. Can you come over? I went to their house, not knowing that my whole world was about to crash down. When I walked into the living room, Margaret was sitting on the couch with her arms crossed, looking like she had already made up her mind about me. Lee was there too, looking way too innocent for someone who'd just turned my family against me. Dad didn't waste any time. Lee told us something, and I need you to be honest with us. Are you on drugs? I laughed because it was so absurd. What? No, of course not. Where is this coming from? Margaret's eyes narrowed. Lee said she found some pills in your room when you stayed over last weekend. I froze. Lee hadn't been in my room, or so I thought. I never left anything suspicious there. That's not true. I don't know what she's talking about. But Lee, with her wide eyes and fake concern, piped in. I didn't want to say anything, but I've been really worried about you, Emma. You've been acting so strange, and I thought maybe you needed help. I stared at her, my mouth open in disbelief. You're lying. I've never done drugs in my life. But it didn't matter what I said. Lee had already planted the lie deep in their minds. Dad and Margaret exchanged looks, and I knew they believed her over me. It didn't matter that I had never given them any reason to doubt me before. That's not all, Margaret added. Lee also mentioned you've been involved with questionable people. Emma, are you selling yourself? I felt like I'd been slapped. My own stepmother, someone who had raised me for years, was accusing me of being a prostitute, and all because of something Lee said. I couldn't believe it. No, I can't believe you're even asking me that. Lee's lying. But again, my words didn't seem to matter. Lee had woven her web, and they were caught in it. Emma, Dad said, his voice softer now, like he wanted to believe me but couldn't. We just want to help you. If you're in trouble, we need to know. I'm not in trouble. I yelled, tears welling up in my eyes. Lee is lying to you. Lee, still playing the innocent victim, looked at me with wide eyes. Emma, I'm just trying to help you. I don't want you to end up like some of my friends who got mixed up in bad things. I couldn't stand to look at her. You're doing this on purpose, I spat. You want them to hate me. Margaret stood up. That's enough, Emma. Until you can be honest with us, we can't trust you. We love you. But we need to take a step back. Take a step back. That was their way of saying they didn't want me around anymore. I left the house that day feeling numb. My own family, the people who were supposed to have my back, had turned against me because of Lee's lies. I didn't know what to do. I tried calling my mom, but she lived across the country, and while she believed me, there wasn't much she could do from so far away. The worst part was that Lee kept escalating her lies. She started telling people in town that I was a drug addict, and soon the rumors spread. I lost my job because my boss heard the gossip and didn't want someone unreliable working for him. Friends stopped calling, and I became more isolated than ever. Lee's lies took everything from me. My family, my job, my reputation. I was spiraling, and she was thriving on the attention. Every time I tried to confront her, she'd twist things around, making me look like the unstable one. The final straw came when Dad called me again, this time to tell me that they didn't want me coming around anymore. Emma, until you can get help, it's best if you stay away. We can't have you around, Lee. She's been through enough. Been through enough? I was the one who had lost everything, and yet Lee was the victim in their eyes. I was done. I packed up my things and moved to a new city, hoping to start over. But the damage had been done. My relationship with my family was shattered, and I didn't know if it could ever be repaired. Months went by, and every time I thought about reaching out to them, I remembered the way they looked at me that day, like I was a stranger, not their daughter. I couldn't forgive them for that, and I definitely couldn't forgive Lee. But as time passed, I began to wonder if there was more to Lee's behavior. What kind of person lies like that, completely destroying someone's life? Was it just jealousy? Or was there something deeper going on with her? Not that it mattered anymore. I had to move on with my life, with or without them. It's been a year since everything fell apart, and while I've managed to rebuild some of what I lost, the pain of losing my family still lingers. I don't know if I'll ever be able to trust them again, or if they'll ever see through Lee's lies. But one thing's for sure. If they ever want me back in their lives, they'll have to face the truth about who Lee really is. I'm not holding my breath. After the confrontation with my family, things only got worse. I tried to move on, but it wasn't that simple. The betrayal was a wound that festered, growing deeper with each passing day. Lee's lies had infected my life, and I couldn't escape the consequences. It wasn't just the loss of my job or friends, it was the loss of my identity. Everything I thought I knew about myself was questioned, and it all led back to my father kicking me out of the house, the ultimate betrayal. The day it happened is still crystal clear in my memory. I'd gone back to my father's house, desperate to make him see reason. Maybe if I explained everything calmly, face to face, he'd understand. I wanted to believe that somewhere inside him, the dad who raised me was still there. The dad who used to cheer for me at soccer games, who taught me how to ride a bike, who always said, "Family comes first." I wanted that version of my father back, but when I walked through the door, I immediately felt the tension in the air. Margaret was sitting in the kitchen, arms crossed, staring at me like I was something rotten that needed to be taken out. Lee, of course, was nowhere to be seen, but I knew she was around, probably listening from the shadows, waiting for things to fall apart like she always wanted. My father stood by the kitchen counter, his face stern, like he'd already made up his mind before I even spoke a word. "Dad, we need to talk," I began, trying to keep my voice steady. "You have to hear my side of this." He didn't respond right away, and that silence was suffocating. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat, pounding louder with each second that passed. Finally, he sighed. "I don't know if there's anything left to say, Emma. We've given you time. We've tried to help. You haven't helped me," I shot back, my voice shaking now. "You've only listened to Lee. Everything she's told you is a lie, and I can prove it. Please, just listen to me." Margaret shook her head, and I could feel her judgment piercing through me. "Emma, we've heard enough. Lee's been nothing but concerned for you, and you've done nothing to show us that she's wrong." The frustration boiled up inside me, and I couldn't hold it in anymore. Lee is lying because she's jealous. She's always wanted attention, and this is how she gets it. "Don't you see? She's manipulating you." But my words fell on deaf ears. My father's expression didn't change. He wasn't even considering my side of the story. "Emma," he said, his voice low but firm, "this isn't healthy. For you or for Lee, I think it's best if you don't come around anymore, at least until you get help." "Get help?" I repeated, incredulous. "You think I'm the one who needs help? I haven't done anything wrong. I'm not on drugs. I'm not selling myself. Lee made it all up, and you're throwing me out because of her lies." My father's gaze hardened. "We can't have this negativity in the house anymore. I'm sorry, but I need you to leave." Margaret nodded in agreement, her lips pressed into a thin line. "It's for the best." I stood there stunned. This was it. They were choosing Lee's lies over me, their own daughter. I felt like I was being erased, like everything I'd ever done for them. Every moment of love, every shared memory, was being wiped away in an instant. I looked at my father one last time, hoping for some flicker of doubt, some sign that he might reconsider. But there was nothing. He was lost to me. I turned and left without another word, tears stinging my eyes as I slammed the door behind me. The sound echoed in my head, a final, cruel punctuation to the life I once knew. The first few months after being kicked out were a blur of despair. I moved in with a friend, Jessica, who was kind enough to let me crash on her couch while I tried to get my life back together. But no matter how hard I tried to distract myself, I couldn't shake the feeling of abandonment. Every time I passed a family in the park, or heard someone mention their parents, a sharp pain shot through my chest. I couldn't stop thinking about Lee and how she had turned everyone I loved against me. Jessica tried to be supportive, but I could tell she didn't fully understand what I was going through. Maybe you should just reach out to them again, she suggested one evening while we sat on her tiny balcony. Maybe they've cooled down by now. You could. No. I interrupted, my voice bitter. They don't want me. They made that very clear. She looked at me sympathetically, but I could see the doubt in her eyes. I knew she wanted to help, but unless you've been through it, you can't really understand what it's like to have your family turn on you. To be betrayed by the people who were supposed to love you unconditionally. I spent the next few years trying to rebuild my life, but it wasn't easy. The rumors Lee spread had followed me. Even in the new city, whispers about me lingered. I applied for jobs, but each rejection felt like another nail in the coffin of the person I used to be. People looked at me differently, like I was damaged, untrustworthy. Then, about 2 years after I'd been kicked out, something unexpected happened. It was a Saturday afternoon, and I was working at a small cafe. I had finally found a steady job as a barista, and while it wasn't my dream career, it paid the bills. I was wiping down the counter when a man walked in. He looked vaguely familiar, but I couldn't quite place him. Emma? He asked, hesitating. I turned to him, curious. Yeah. He smiled awkwardly. You probably don't remember me. I'm Dylan. Lee's ex. My stomach dropped at the mention of Lee's name. Dylan? Oh, God. I remembered him now. He had dated Lee for a few years back when we were younger. They'd broken up right around the time Lee started spreading those rumors about me. What the hell was he doing here? I forced a polite smile, even though all I wanted to do was turn and walk away. Oh, yeah? Dylan. What's up? He shifted uncomfortably, running a hand through his hair. Look, I know this is weird, but I've been meaning to talk to you for a while. I wasn't sure if I should, but after everything that's happened, I need to clear my conscience. I raised an eyebrow. Clear your conscience? He sighed, looking genuinely remorseful. It's about Lee. And the things she said about you. The drugs, the prostitution. It was all a lie. My breath caught in my throat. Hearing someone else say it, someone who knew Lee well, made it all the more real. I know that, I said, my voice colder than I intended. But my family doesn't. Dylan nodded, looking down at the floor. I know. And I'm sorry. I should have said something sooner, but I didn't realize how far she would take it. She had her issues. She was always jealous of you, Emma. I think that's why she did it. I stared at him, trying to process what he was saying. Jealous? Of what? You, Dylan said simply. You were older, more independent, had your own life. Lee always felt like she was living in your shadow, even if you didn't notice. She craved attention, and when she realized she could get it by making you look bad, well, she ran with it. I didn't know the full extent of it at the time, but she admitted it to me after we broke up. She felt guilty, but she didn't know how to stop. My head was spinning. Lee had admitted it. She had actually confessed to making everything up. And Dylan had known this whole time? Why didn't you tell me sooner? I demanded. Anger bubbling up inside me. You could have stopped this. My family could have known the truth years ago. I'm sorry, Dylan said again, his voice small. I didn't know how. I didn't think they'd believe me. And Lee? She has a way of making people doubt themselves. She messed with my head too. I shook my head, barely able to believe what I was hearing. After everything, after all the pain and heartache Lee had caused, it all boiled down to jealousy. That's why my father had kicked me out. That's why I had lost my family, my job, my entire life. Dylan stood there, waiting for me to say something, but I didn't have the words. I couldn't even look at him anymore. All I felt was rage. You should go, I muttered, turning away from him. Emma, I'm really sorry, he said one last time before quietly leaving the cafe. I stood there, gripping the counter, trying to steady myself as the weight of everything crashed down on me. Lee's lies had destroyed my life, and all because she was jealous. And now, years later, I finally had the truth. But what good was it now? After that day, I couldn't stop thinking about confronting Lee. The rage I felt was like nothing I had ever experienced before. It consumed me, keeping me awake at night, replaying every moment of betrayal. I wanted answers. I wanted her to admit what she had done, not just to me, but to our father, to everyone. Years had passed since Dylan had confessed Lee's lies to me. At first I thought hearing the truth would offer some kind of closure, but all it did was reopen old wounds. I'd built my life without my family, without their support, without their love, and I didn't need their apologies. Especially not now. I was in a good place for the first time in a long while. I had a new job I loved, working in marketing for a nonprofit, and more importantly, I had found someone who accepted me for who I was, without the baggage of my past. No one I had met 2 years ago through mutual friends, and from the moment we started talking, everything felt easy. He didn't pry into my family life. He didn't judge me for the broken relationships. He just saw me, Emma, the person I had become despite everything. When Noah proposed, I felt like my life was finally coming together again. We were planning a small wedding, nothing extravagant. I didn't need a big celebration. What mattered was starting our new life together, building a family that wasn't poisoned by lies and betrayal. But of course, life wasn't that simple. I hadn't spoken to my father or Margaret in years. After they kicked me out, I cut all ties. I moved cities, changed my phone number, and blocked them on social media. Every now and then, I'd hear through the grapevine that they were asking about me, but I never responded. Even after Dylan's confession, I didn't reach out. What would I say? That they believed a lie over me, their own daughter, and that I had to suffer because of their blind trust in Lee? I couldn't forgive them for that. Then one day, about 6 months into our wedding planning, I got an unexpected email. It was from my father. I stared at the screen for a long time before opening it. My heart pounded in my chest as I read his words. Emma, I've thought about you every day since you left. I know we made a terrible mistake believing Lee over you, and I can't tell you how sorry I am for everything that's happened. Margaret and I miss you more than words can say, and we want to make things right. I heard through a friend that you're getting married. I'd love to be there, to walk you down the aisle like I always imagined. Please, Emma, give me a chance to show you how sorry I am. I put my phone down, my hands shaking. He wanted to apologize. After all these years, after everything they had put me through, he wanted to make things right. For days I couldn't stop thinking about it. No one noticed I was distracted and asked me what was going on, but I couldn't even find the words to explain. I hadn't told him the full story of what happened with my family. He knew they weren't part of my life, but he didn't know the extent of the betrayal. I had buried it so deep that it almost felt like another lifetime. Finally, one night, I sat Noah down and told him everything. About Lee, about my father and Margaret. About how they had turned their backs on me when I needed them most. I told him about Dylan's confession and how, even after hearing the truth, I couldn't bring myself to forgive them. Noah listened quietly, his face thoughtful, but he didn't push me to make any decisions. You don't owe them anything, he said, his voice soft. If you don't want them at the wedding, that's your choice. This is your day, Emma. It's about our future, not the past. His words brought me comfort, but they didn't make the decision any easier. Part of me still longed for the family I lost, even though I knew they could never be the same. I wanted my father to walk me down the aisle, to be there for one of the most important days of my life. But could I really forgive them for what they had done? A week later, I finally replied to my father's email. I told him I appreciated the apology, but I wasn't ready to forgive and forget. Too much damage had been done, but if he wanted to be at the wedding, I was willing to let him come, as long as he understood that things between us would never be the same. I wasn't inviting Lee or Margaret. That was non-negotiable. 2 days after I sent that email, my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize, but something told me to pick it up. Emma? My father's voice was shaky, filled with emotion. I didn't say anything at first. I just listened, waiting for him to speak. I got your email, he said finally. I'm so happy you're willing to let me come to the wedding, but I have to ask. Are you really not going to invite Lee? My stomach twisted. I knew where this was going. No, Dad. Lee isn't invited. You know why? There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could hear him breathing, trying to choose his next words carefully. Emma? She's your sister. I know what she did was terrible, but she's still family. She's grown up a lot since then. She's sorry for what she did, and she wants to make amends. I could feel the old anger rising in me. Dad. Lee destroyed my life. I lost everything because of her lies, and you and Margaret believed her without question. She doesn't get to just show up at my wedding and pretend everything is okay. I understand that, he said, his voice pleading. But this is a chance for us to all be together again, to start healing as a family. I can't come to your wedding if Lee isn't there. It wouldn't be right. I froze. An ultimatum. He was giving me an ultimatum on my wedding day. Invite the person who ruined my life, or he wouldn't come. Are you serious right now? I asked, my voice tight with disbelief. I'm serious, Emma. I love you, and I want to be there for you. But I can't turn my back on Lee. She's my daughter, too. I felt like I was going to be sick. You're really going to choose her over me again? I asked, my voice trembling with rage. After everything that's happened, you're still taking her side? It's not about sides, he said desperately. It's about family. We need to come together. No, I said, my voice cold and firm. What we needed was for you to stand by me when I needed you. You didn't. And now, when I'm finally happy, you're trying to ruin it again. Emma, please don't do this, he begged. We can fix this. No, Dad, we can't. I hung up the phone, my hands shaking. Tears filled my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I wouldn't let him or Lee or anyone else take this day away from me. I had fought too hard to get here. The months leading up to the wedding were bittersweet. On one hand, I was marrying the love of my life. On the other, my father wasn't going to be there. I had made my decision, and I stood by it. But it still hurt. Deep down, I had hoped he would choose me, that he would finally see how much pain he had caused by siding with Lee all those years ago. But he didn't. He couldn't. I tried to focus on the good things. Picking out flowers with my maid of honor, Rachel, finalizing the menu, choosing the perfect dress. Noah was supportive through all of it, never once pushing me to invite my father or Lee. He understood that this wedding was about us and our future, not the broken pieces of my past. Still, as the day approached, I couldn't help but feel the absence of my family weighing on me. I knew my mom couldn't make it. She lived across the country, and we weren't close anymore either. She had tried to stay neutral during the whole mess with Lee, and while I didn't resent her for it, it created a distance between us that we never quite bridged. The night before the wedding, Rachel threw a small bachelorette party for me. It was just a few close friends, a lot of wine, and some good laughs. For a few hours I was able to forget about everything and just enjoy myself. But as the party wound down and my friends left, I found myself sitting alone in my apartment, staring at the invitation to my own wedding. I had sent one to my father, even though I knew he wouldn't come. Part of me wanted to rip it up, to erase him from my life entirely. But another part of me, maybe the part that still longed for the family I lost, couldn't do it. The wedding day arrived, and it was everything I had dreamed of. The sun was shining, the air was warm, and as I stood at the altar with Noah, surrounded by our friends and chosen family, I felt at peace. I had made the right choice. My father wasn't there. Neither was Lee. And for the first time, I didn't feel the weight of their absence. I didn't need them to validate my happiness, to prove that I had moved on. I had found my own happiness, my own family, and that was enough. As Noah and I exchanged vows, I felt a sense of closure. Not the kind that comes from forgiveness or reconciliation, but the kind that comes from choosing yourself, from realizing that some wounds can't be healed, and that's okay. After the ceremony, as we danced under the stars, I felt free. For so long, I had carried the pain of my family's betrayal with me, letting it define me. But now, standing beside Noah, I knew that my past didn't control my future. I had built a new life, one filled with love and trust, and nothing, not my father, not Lee, not anyone, could take that away from me. And for the first time in years, I felt whole. The wedding had been a perfect day. Standing with Noah at the altar, I had felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one that didn't involve the betrayals, lies, and heartbreak of my past. For the first time, I allowed myself to believe I could build a life free from the shadows of my family. But in the days following the wedding, as Noah and I returned from our brief honeymoon, reality set in. The weight of my decision to cut ties with my father, Margaret, and Lee hung over me. There had been no apology, no last-minute plea for forgiveness from them. I'd made it clear by not inviting Lee and standing firm when my father issued his ultimatum that I was done. But the world doesn't simply stop when you make those decisions. People move on, and sometimes they spiral. About 2 months after the wedding, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I let it go to voicemail, but when I listened to the message, my blood ran cold. "Emma, it's Margaret. Please call me back. It's Lee. She's in the hospital. She tried to hurt herself. Please, Emma. We need you." I froze. Lee had tried to kill herself. For a moment, I felt sick to my stomach. Lee, the sister who had ruined my life, who had lied about me and torn my family apart, was in the hospital because she had tried to end it all. A wave of guilt swept over me, but I pushed it down. This wasn't my fault. Lee had made her own choices, and I wasn't responsible for them. Still, the fact that Margaret had reached out to me, begging me to come, weighed on me. I played the voicemail again, trying to gauge Margaret's tone. Was it desperation? Fear? Guilt? I didn't know. I hadn't spoken to her since I left, and now she was asking me to jump back into the mess I had fought so hard to leave behind. Noah was in the kitchen making dinner when I finally gathered the courage to tell him. "I got a voicemail from Margaret," I said, keeping my voice as neutral as possible. "Lee's in the hospital. She tried to hurt herself." He looked up from the stove, his brow furrowed with concern. "What did she say? Is Lee okay?" It didn't give much detail, I admitted. "Margaret just said she's in the hospital and asked me to come." She sounded desperate. Noah wiped his hands on a towel and walked over to me, placing a comforting hand on my shoulder. "What are you going to do?" I shrugged, unsure. "I don't know. I've spent years trying to get away from all of them, from the damage they caused. But now, it feels like I'm being dragged back into it. I don't know if I can go." Noah's voice was gentle but firm. "Emma, you don't owe them anything. Lee made her choices and your family made theirs. You're not responsible for what happened to her." His words echoed my own thoughts, but it didn't make the decision any easier. A part of me, the part that still remembered Lee as the little girl I once tried to be a big sister to, felt an obligation. But the rational part of me, the part that had rebuilt a life without their toxicity, knew I couldn't go back. That night, I lay awake, replaying the events that led us all to this point. Lee's lies, the years of manipulation, the way my father had chosen her over me time and time again. Could I walk back into their lives now, even with Lee in such a fragile state? What would that accomplish? I thought about what might happen if I did go to the hospital. What would I say? Would they expect me to forgive Lee? To sweep all the pain under the rug because she was in a bad place? And what if I didn't forgive her? What if I went, and it made everything worse? The next morning, I made my decision. I wasn't going. Noah supported me, but I could tell he was concerned. "Are you sure?" he asked. "I don't want you to regret this later." "I'm sure," I said, trying to convince myself as much as him. Lee's choices led her here. I've spent too long trying to fix things that aren't my fault. I'm not going to let them guilt me into coming back. And so, I didn't call Margaret back. I didn't go to the hospital. I stayed away, choosing the peace I had fought so hard for over the chaos my family always brought with them. A few weeks later, I received another voicemail, this time from my father. It was the first time I had heard his voice since the ultimatum before the wedding. "Emma, it's Dad. I know you're probably angry, and I understand why. But Lee's in rehab now, and I think it would mean a lot to her if you visited. She's getting help. She's admitted to everything she did, and she's trying to make amends. I know it's a lot to ask, but maybe it's time to start healing as a family. Please think about it." I deleted the message without replying. Lee was in rehab. She was getting help and admitting to everything she did, according to my father. But I knew better than to get sucked back into that web. Leah had been manipulating people for years, and while she might have been making amends now, it didn't change what she had done to me. It didn't erase the years of damage, or the fact that my family had abandoned me when I needed them most. In the weeks that followed, I received more messages. Margaret called several times, leaving long, emotional voicemails about how Lee was improving and how they all wanted to be a family again. My father sent texts asking me to visit Lee at the rehab facility, to give her a chance, but each time I ignored them. I had made my decision. One afternoon, about 6 months after Lee's suicide attempt, I ran into Dylan. It was completely unexpected. Noah and I were out for lunch, enjoying a sunny Saturday, when I spotted him across the street. He saw me at the same time, and before I could avoid him, he was walking over. "Emma," he said, sounding surprised. "I didn't expect to see you here." I forced a smile, feeling a wave of discomfort. I hadn't seen Dylan since he confessed Lee's lies to me years ago. Seeing him now, after everything, felt strange. "Yeah, just out with Noah," I replied, nodding towards my husband, who was watching us curiously from the cafe table. Dylan hesitated for a moment before speaking again. "I don't want to intrude, but have you heard about Lee?" I stiffened. "I've heard enough. She's in rehab," he continued, ignoring the coldness in my voice. "She's really trying, Emma. I know she hurt you, but she's admitted to everything now. She's working through her issues. Maybe." "Dylan." "Stop," I interrupted, my voice firm. "I'm happy she's getting help, but that doesn't change anything for me. I've moved on." Dylan looked at me, a mixture of sympathy and sadness in his eyes. "I get it. I really do. But people can change, Emma. Lee's trying to make amends." "Maybe." "I don't need her amends," I snapped, my patience wearing thin. "I don't owe her anything. I spent years suffering because of her lies. I'm not going to let her back into my life now just because she feels guilty." Dylan sighed, clearly realizing he wasn't going to change my mind. "Okay. I just thought you should know." I nodded, wanting the conversation to end. "Thanks for telling me." He gave me a small, sad smile before walking away. Noah watched him go, then turned to me. "You okay?" I nodded, though I wasn't sure if I really was. Seeing Dylan had brought up old memories, old pain. But I wasn't going to let it drag me back into that dark place. "I'm fine," I said, trying to shake off the encounter. "I just want to focus on us, on our life." As time went on, the messages from my father and Margaret grew less frequent. Lee completed her stint in rehab and was apparently doing better. But I didn't care. I had made the choice to cut them off for good, and I wasn't going to look back. Sometimes late at night, I'd find myself wondering what my life would have been like if Lee had never told those lies. If my father had never believed her, would we still be a family? Would things have turned out differently? But those thoughts were fleeting, and I always pushed them away. I had my own family now, with Noah. We were building a life together, one that wasn't stained by the toxic dynamics of my past. And that was enough for me. Eventually, the calls stopped altogether. My father and Margaret must have realized that I wasn't coming back, no matter how much they begged. Lee, too, seemed to understand that there was no fixing what she had broken. And so, I moved forward, leaving the past where it belonged, behind me.